Hello. I This is a solo episode. I cannot figure out how to zoom in on this image, so you get to see all of my bookmarks. I'm not technically adroit at Zoom. Um, my co-host is. Welcome to a special edition of First Reform Take, uh, Draftermath video. I specifically asked Waylon what energy I should bring to this recording. I said something to the effect of, should I just be saying I'm going to kill myself and James Harden? And Waylon just replied, yes. This was not, I don't think, the craziest trade deadline in history. I don't know if anything's really ever going to top the Luca trade from last year. But I can safely say, um, this was the dumbest deadline in history. Truly just one baffling decision after another. Um, and yeah, no one wins this trade deadline except for the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are probably going to have two picks in the lottery. See something here real quick. Um, yeah, the Utah pick, the Oklahoma City pick, um, plus the Philly pick will be, somewhere in the teens. They did trade the 30th pick to, uh, actually, no, that was already going to the Wizards, which got traded to Dallas. We'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, two chances for what is far and away the best team in the league to draft two players who um, could immediately uh, make an impact and be all-star level uh, players in one of the deepest drafts in recent memory. I don't think there was a single decision made at this deadline that made any sense. I'll just run through the big trades real quick. Give me 1 second. I'm going to go take a shot of whiskey. And we're back. We'll start with the biggest trade featuring the biggest man of all, James Harden. He did it again, folks. He had a bunch of, mealy mouth bullshit about how he was finally home and leaving Philly, and Daryl Morey was a liar, and he's here in the Clippers. And a year and a half into it, he he asks out because they weren't going to give 38-year-old James Harden $50 million a year or whatever it is he was looking for in the two year deals he's been taking for the last, I don't know, decade or so. Yeah. This is just who James Harden is. I personally think he is one of the more overrated players in the league over the last 5 years. There was a time I think he was a genuine superstar. I think that time has passed. I think the idea that he is doing this to win a championship is a farce. And this is because Cleveland, I think, panicked not unreasonably over Darius Garland's health situation. Um, and just felt that they were in win now mode. They will not win now. James Harden has zero rings for a reason. But this is what desperate front offices do. And I think Donovan Mitchell had told them this year, we make the conference finals or I leave. And they're just in a tailspin of trying to salvage what was left of Darius Garland's value and try to make a playoff push in a year when putatively the East is winnable. It's not. I think Detroit is a better team than Cleveland. I think the Knicks are a better team than Cleveland. I'm not entirely convinced that a the Celtics team without Tatum is uh, is worse than Cleveland right now in a 7 game series. This trade sucks. I was over Garland, but I also felt that if they were going to move him to get under the luxury tax, it was to get younger and get some picks back. And this is just the exact opposite of that. But also, our buddy Fat James here managed to fuck over the rest of the league. The Clippers were on a tremendous hot streak. Kawhi was playing like a bona fide MVP candidate. And for what I believe is now the third time in his career, James said, nah, and asked out at the worst possible time. And now the Clippers are fucked. They did manage to get a first rounder sort of back from the Pacers. We'll get to that in a second. But they are going to go from, I mean, look, they don't have their lotto pick anyway, but there was no incentive for them to not try to make the play in and push that Thunder pick as late as possible. This pick is going to be in the tens now, and short of Adam Silver outright rigging the draft in reverse, the first commissioner to do so, there's a very real possibility that, I mean, if the pick is somewhere in this range, you're talking about a 30 to 25% chance of it being top four and giving a team that does not need any help a potentially elite player, whether it's one of the big three guys, whether it's one of Caleb Wilson, Kingston Flemings, who should be an immediate impact player. They don't need this. Um, and that's on top of the other insanely stupid fucking trade that happened this week, the Utah Jazz trade. I think this is a terrible trade for the Jazz, both from a timeline perspective and from what they're giving up. I am also kind of a Jaren Jackson hater. I think the idea of Jaren Jackson is is has outpaced what he actually provides. I think he's having a worse year than normal, but I never bought that he was legitimately defensive player of the year. Or I mean, if you look at the year he won, yeah, I mean, I know he averaged 3 blocks a game. He led the league, sure. But there were other players that year who I think had similar to superior defensive contributions. Um, and even if you buy that he's that level of defender, he doesn't contribute offensively that much. He's not a self-creator. And I don't totally understand what what his fit is with Laurie and with Keontae George. I mean, or Walker Kessler if the Jazz decide to bring him back. He's not the kind of player you give up 3 first rounders. And on top of all that, you are already in the danger zone for this pick going to the Thunder. Like if any team, if you end up if you end up even in like seventh, and like Memphis is all in on the tank, Milwaukee's all in on the tank. You could definitely end up seventh or eighth. And if you end up there, all it takes is one other team jumping up and you're fucked and you lose that pick. Um, it's totally asinine. This does not speed up their rebuild at all. I think at best, Jackson is a ceiling raiser player who um, can make a good competitive team into a uh, contender, a bona fide contender, but he's not going to turn a team that's been dog shit for like 4 years now um, into a consistent play-in team. And it's like, is that what they're going for, or are they still just going to mothball Jaren Jackson and Laurie and Keontae for for the next 30 games to keep the pick somewhere in sort of the safe, 1 through 5 zone. It doesn't matter. They are not worse than any of the other teams in this range. And you're basically praying that Dallas and what's left of Milwaukee keep you from falling into 7 and 8, where it gets into the very real possibility of now, granted, I mean, maybe Ryan Smith already has a back deal with Adam Silver, and no matter where this pick ends up, it's going to end up somewhere in the top three, so they can take Debanza and keep the BYU to Utah pipeline going. I don't know. Um, it's an incredibly stupid risk. It creates the possibility that the one of your direct competitors and one of the best teams in the league are going to end up uh, with your first rounder. I don't understand what's going on. If OKC traded this and now somehow the pick goes to Minnesota, I don't know. My understanding is that, let's see if we can mess around with this sufficiently, that Utah, the pick falls back 3 spots. I don't know. It's not super likely to get there at this point, but it's a real risk that they lose the pick. Even if it's not going to Oklahoma, and it was, I truly do not understand what the hell any of this means or who would get this pick if it ends up uh not conveying, but it's still a bizarre risk. I don't think it changes their timeline as a competitor. I just don't get the trade. It's a trade of we have had too much lottery bad luck, and now we're just going to start trying to acquire talent. That's not the worst idea in the world. I just don't think the talent they acquired was worth what they gave up. And we've learned the lesson. I think I talked about this on the last episode of the Desmond Bain and the McCall Bridges trade. You just don't trade this much draft capital for the floor raiser or the ceiling raiser guy. You just don't. Um, but they're not the only ones. Washington did an insane trade acquiring Anthony Davis for their second first rounder, which we're not close to a draft episode yet, but I tend to think because of the NIL money, a lot of these guys in this range are going to end up being, juniors, seniors who um, are really just bench contributors. I think if you don't have a pick somewhere in the high teens this year, you're not likely to get a starter. I just don't think this is going to end up being a very deep draft. And by starter, I mean someone who can even develop into a starter long term. But we'll talk about that sometime closer to April, May. Um, yeah, they trade for AD. Good on Dallas's current leadership for admitting the Nico Harrison Luka trade was a disaster, and getting what they could for Anthony Davis's corpse. I don't know that this does anything for Washington. They're also a bad team. Anthony Davis cannot stay healthy. Um, okay, they'll probably go 8-2 or 10-13 in the limited number of games Trey and AD play together with Sar and um, I don't know who else is on their team, Kaishan George and whoever they end up drafting in this range. Um, but again, not a needle moving trade. Um, then we talk about what Indiana and Oklahoma City did. Um, Indiana and Los Angeles Clippers. The Clippers are just deciding to tank despite the fact that their pick goes to Oklahoma City. But I think they did well to move Zubac for a pick. Now, granted, it may not convey, but again, if there's a 40-ish% chance that this pick falls out of the top four. And if it does, what did Indiana get out of this? I mean, they gave up Benedict Mathurin, who I think was overrated, but still one of their more productive bench players, um, to get a center who is a good rim protector and probably um a good sort of lob threat for Tyrese Halliburton, I don't see how this makes them necessarily more competitive next year than if they end up in sort of the four to, the 5 to 10 range, getting a good young player because they don't, there's, if Tyrese is cooked, there's no contingency plan. And you don't have that young player you get in this pick to build around. Um, Maybe it's signaling that NBA execs don't view this draft as being as strong as I think maybe draft Twitter, Reddit does. And, and it still protects them in the advent they finish in the top four. And look, if they do stay in the top four and grab one of those players, it's a good trade. It's just an odd move to do now. And it's a disaster for the league because the Clippers are going to end up somewhere down here now. They're worse than Charlotte. They're worse than Portland. They're probably worse than Dallas. They're arguably worse than Utah. They're maybe worse than Milwaukee, although if Milwaukee completely sandbags e- uh, Giannis for the rest of the season, maybe not. But then what are they doing with Kawhi? I mean, they have no. His career is on a short leash now. He's not going to want to stick around and wait for whoever they draft here, if they even get that pick, to develop. Um, I just don't know. There's nothing else to talk about. This was a flaming car wreck of a draft, of a uh, trade deadline. Not even getting into the constant media jerking off over Giannis when I think it was sort of apparent from the word go that the Bucks weren't going to move him for what was out there. And I don't think anybody really wanted to mortgage their entire team for a guy who may not be able to play in the next months. Um, yeah, I mean, obviously you get Giannis for the long term, but you're not giving up like 7 picks and swaps for a guy who may not play until March. Yeah, this sucked. I hate the James Harden trade. I do not like James Harden. If this ends with Oklahoma City getting even one pick in the top three and getting a genuinely elite talent, like Cameron Boozer or DJ Darren Peterson, just burn the fucking league down.